Thank you, colleagues. So our next item is a public participation meeting. This is Phase 1 Options Report, the London Ward Boundary Review. I'm just going to preface this so I can look for a motion to open the PPM, and then afterwards we can move into our own dialogue as well. But I did speak to the clerk's team just for clarity from some questions that were raised by council members last week on this. And I know our folks from Watson and Associates will be joining us on the line momentarily. But just for colleagues' information, today is a touch point for our consultants to update us on where they are. After today, there is a second round of public consultation, as well as opportunities for individual councillors to book follow-up meetings as well. So today we are not looking for direction to make changes to what the work the consultants are doing as per the RFP. It is an opportunity to ask questions, to get some more information for members of the public to provide us feedback through the public participation meeting. But it is not a change to the scope of the work that our consultants will be doing for Phase 2. So I just wanted to preface that for colleagues' information. And I'm going to look now for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Ferreira and seconded by Councillor McAllister. And colleagues.
Trusso votes yes.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Okay, so just as we did with the last item, if any members of the public are here to speak to the item with respect to the ward boundary changes proposal, now's the time to make your way to a microphone to provide us your feedback and comments. And I will also look for any participants online. And we have none online, so I'm going to look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Frank and seconded by Councillor Lame. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm up here.
Saw you up there. Sorry about that.
Okay.
If you can give us your name, and then you'll have 5 minutes, and when you're ready to go ahead.
5 minutes? Okay.
And I will give you a 30-second warning as you're approaching your 5-minute mark.
Yes, hello. Thank you for, first of all, this process that you've established, the city, and the public consultation part of it. My name is Gil Warren, and I live in Woodfield, in the area of Adelaide and Central, 624 William Street. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the Woodfield Community Association, but I have been a member of that board and very active in downtown politics for many years. I read over the presentation that the consultants are going to make. And just a few quick comments. You've given me how much time? 5 minutes, all right. In terms of the issue of population growth, and I can see in the plan that it's looking at where will the city's growth be in 10 years, and then trying to develop a word system to deal with that. Just a word of caution on that. I've lived in this city since the 70s, and I've seen periods of growth for the city and then periods of stagnation. And I've seen situations where we suddenly get a recession and we end up with empty holes in the ground where there were supposed to be big buildings. Anyway, I would say in designing the ward boundary changes, population growth 10 years from now should not be the #1 priority. The #1 priority is a system to be adjusted now that will deal with the actual population we have. My big issue and concern is the communities of interest. And that's talking about neighborhoods and different community groups in the city. And I think that is the most important thing. And it also has to be, whatever is created, it should be a simple system. I don't think there should be really, while we have to adjust for current population growth, there shouldn't be any big changes where we completely change a ward around, or we change the name of the ward, or because people are used to the system we have now in terms of, I live in Ward 13, I know the rough boundaries, and I can relate to that. If we just change all the numbers, we'll just confuse everybody. I also proposed a long time ago that the wards not just have numbers like Ward 13, but also include a name, like in the case of our ward, Woodfield Oxford Park, okay? They do this in other cities, and it allows people in their head to know, okay, I guess I'm in that ward when they're trying to figure it out. I just want to highlight 3 communities of interest that I think are divided by the proposals that have been put forward by the consultants. One is my own neighborhood of Woodfield and what I call London East, which other people call Old East Village. I know people think that Adelaide is some kind of wall and that no one in Woodfield ever goes on the other side of the wall, but actually we do all the time. We live in those 2 neighborhoods, but we move back and forth. We shop in one neighborhood, we live in another. People go to school in the other neighborhood, things like that. So, and I noticed in the proposals that London East is being sort of moved around in these proposals to go into Ward 2 or to go into another ward. And I would suggest that maybe Woodfield and London East could be in the current Ward 13. The other neighborhood that's really split up is the Ward 2 only includes half of Glencairn and none of Pond Mills. And I think the northern Glencairn is also connected to the southern Glencairn, and your proposals should try and keep Glencairn and Pond Mills in one ward. The other is Lambeth. Lambeth is an old town that used to be an independent place in the countryside, and we swallowed it up. And whatever proposal comes forward, Lambeth is unique, and I think it should be represented by one councillor. There's a problem when a community is divided in half and it ends up with 2 councillors who have different political opinions. It's better to have one councillor who can speak for that. Just a couple of other things. Like, how much time have I got left down there, Mr. Chair?
So you've got about 35 seconds left, Mr. Warren, and just before you go on,
Yeah.
To hopefully help the consultants as well as the counselors, the comments that you've made so far, were you referring to a specific map option number or in general? Because if there's a specific map, I think it'd be good to highlight that for the consultants, and I'm not counting this answer against your time.
Okay.
But was there a map in their package that you were referring to in particular?
I was referring to a number of the maps with a number of instances. I'm going to attend the meetings in next week, and we can get into all the details. I just wanted to give kind of an overview from a community activist point of view.
Okay, so we'll resume your time now.
All right. The other big thing is class. The lower class you are, the less likely you are to vote. The more educated, the more higher class you will vote. And I think that should be taken into consideration. New Londoners, doesn't matter where they're from, takes them a long time to get involved in city politics. Our turnout is atrocious, and one of the problems is the system's too complicated. Got to keep it simple. Last comment. London is really not one city, but 3 cities. There's my downtown part of the city where I can walk and bike and take a bus, and the age is mixed, and there are other wards downtown like that as well. Then there's the old suburbs from the 1950s to the 1980s, and then the new suburbs from the 1990s until now. If you're drawing maps, it would be useful if you put the old suburbs from the 60s together if you can, because they have older populations, they have a long history. I would also note that...
That's your time, Mr.
That's
Warren.
my time. Okay, I'll do the rest at the meetings in a couple.
Yep, and we would welcome you at any of the meetings that we're having on this topic. I'm looking for any further speakers. And I'll just give folks a moment, both in the gallery and online, to see if there's anyone. Okay, and checking with the clerk, there's no one online either. So I will look now for a motion to close the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Frank and seconded by Councillor Ferreira. And we'll ask the clerk to open the vote on that, and then we will move on to our consultant's presentation.
Jocelyn votes yes.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. And Mr. Spicer and Mr. Williams, I see you are both with us online and ready to give us your presentation. I know the last time you were with us, we needed more time, and you had asked for a 10-minute presentation this time. So that's what we've allotted in the schedule for you, and then questions and comments from councilors after that. So when you're ready, if you would like to begin with your presentation to us.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'm prepared to get us started here with this presentation. The point of today's workshop is to simply bring council and the community up to date with the status of the ward boundary review by talking a little bit about the process, the information provided in the preliminary options report, and the next steps. Now, this is an independent review based on parameters provided by the city. So we're working with staff to collect data and consult with the community, and we are developing preliminary options to enhance effective representation in London. The next slide will point out some basic facts about the composition of municipal councils in Ontario. The basic size is 5. London is well above that, of course. And so the relevant point here is that the composition is essentially a local determination, but as the next slide shows, this is essentially something that varies by municipality, the context, the size, the whatever. There's history involved. London, in our view, is not out of line with the other comparable municipalities, and this chart is basically those who are in the general neighborhood, if I could say that, west of Hamilton. So there's nothing really about the composition that we felt we needed to circle back around and talk about. So we will work basically with a 14 ward option as you currently have. And we will start that review, and we have started that review by looking at a set of guiding principles, which we are outlined on the next slide. And those principles were applied initially to the current configuration. Every configuration has its strengths and shortcomings. And on the whole, we assess London's present ward configuration as sound. But the major shortcoming is that the population growth will result in an unacceptable population variation by 2035. In other words, 3 elections out. So there were minor issues related to certain features used as boundaries and the grouping of some of the communities of interest in the current system. And those are outlined in more detail in our report that goes along with this presentation. So in our experience, having a number of options to consider at this point helps to stimulate public discussion. And that's the point that we are at now. We want public discussion. We've already had one example of that today. So the proposed changes begin with fairly modest ones. And preliminary option 1 is one that essentially keeps things as they are. And then we move on to something more, if you will, dramatic and perhaps less familiar. I would just say that for some people, any change to the status quo may be seen as drastic or unacceptable. But in our view, the approach has been to develop plausible adjustments, not wholesale change. So I'm going to ask Zach Spicer to take over here and talk a little bit about these preliminary options that we're putting forward. And the key word here is preliminary. Zach.
Thank you so much, Bob. And again, we're not looking for the public to necessarily endorse or to vote for any of these options in particular. As Bob mentioned, these are intended to generate discussion. The first option provides for some modest adjustment, coming mostly in some of the wards in the northern part of the city. As we will see, this provides for better population parity as we move towards the 2030 and 2034 election cycles. However, there are still four wards that are outside the acceptable range of variation. The communities of interest are largely contained within single wards, including much of rural London. Overall, we argue that this provides an option that is largely successful in offering effective representation. Moving on to the second option, where the focus has been placed on population parity. We can see that this option provides for population parity today, and parity is largely achieved as we move towards the 2030 election cycle. However, certain communities of interest are bisected by certain ward boundaries, and the markers that are used as boundaries aren't necessarily straightforward. We argue, though, that this provides for a partially successful effective representation. Moving on to the third option. Third option builds from the first. It provides for very good population parity today and well into the future. Moving towards the 2034 election cycle, there are no wards that are outside the 15% variation range. Most of the communities of interest are comfortably contained within single wards, and the markers that are used as boundaries are, for the most part, straightforward, with perhaps a notable exception between wards 9 and 10. Next slide. The final option carries along some of the same logic provided in option 2, where population parity is, for the most part, achieved today and largely achieved by the 2030 election cycle. This, however, these ward configurations, however, do not necessarily comfortably contain each community of interest. We argue, however, that this model is partially successful in providing for effective representation. Next slide. Overall, we've reviewed numerous options. Most were deemed as less successful than the 4 potential options that we've provided. Some may refer to these as drastic changes. Others may see them as necessary change. The next task for us is to allow for the public to evaluate each of these options. It's not necessarily a popularity contest, but rather an invitation to explain why various options, either in part or as a whole, are acceptable or not. What emerges will be a final recommendation that might be one of these options, might be a hybrid, or something entirely new. We begin this process next week with a virtual engagement session on October 16th, and then 3 in-person engagement sessions on October 17th from 5 until 7 p.m. We would certainly encourage anyone within the city who is interested or curious about the process to join us and to provide us with feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Spicer. And I know that you had asked for 10 minutes, but you came in well under that at 7.5. So we appreciate the efficiency of that. So we're going to look now to colleagues for a motion to receive the report, and then we can move into questions and comments. And so that's moved by Councillor Pribble and seconded by Councillor Cuddy and Councillor Hopkins, but I looked to the right before I looked to the left, so we'll go with Councillor Cuddy, and we'll open the vote on that. We won't open the vote on that. We're going to move to discussion and questions. And looking for a speakers list. Councillor Frank.
Thank you, yes, and I appreciate the presentation, the work that's gone in so far. I do have a couple general comments, and I'm just wondering, like, based on some of the map options, if I can just add them to the floor. I don't have a motion, but I want to share. Yeah, okay. So I did want to highlight in both options on the map 1 and 3 from Ward 11, which I'm going to be biased and speak from that vantage point. I think we probably all know our wards quite well. There are about 10 houses on Springbank Drive that get cut out and then put over to Ward 13. And not that I don't think that the councillor is great over there. There is no natural connection. There's actually a train berm that runs right through. And so I just want to highlight for the consultants that those 10 houses would feel absolutely no sense of connection to the River Forks neighborhood. I also wanted to highlight for option 4 for Old South residents, and I've already heard a bit of it on my social media, that the option number 4 cuts Old South in half along Rideout, and that residents don't like that because they feel very connected to Old South and Wortley Village, and to have their area cut in half, they wouldn't really appreciate that. So just wanted to pass it along. I did also want to highlight, and the speaker highlighted it well, regarding the names and numbers. I believe at Governance Working Group, we had a brief discussion, but I do think people might remember their ward a bit better if there was a name associated with it. For example, mine right now, if you look at it, it would be South Crest and Old South would be the two largest kind of overarching names. And people know that they live in those areas. When I talk to the general population, they do not know that they live in Ward 11 unless I tell them. And I don't know if it's the same with other folks, but generally the number is not a super big signifier, but the names of their neighborhoods are. So I'm wondering perhaps maybe moving forward, we could look at, when we land on a final map composition, discussing having names associated with the numbers. And the only other question perhaps that I got that I would like to ask through the chair to the consultants was regarding school boundaries. So when people vote in municipal elections, they vote for both their councillor and then trustees. But there are some people whose ward, they would vote for their councillor, but if their kid goes to another school, because it's across the street, that's another ward, so they're not able to vote for the trustees on the same ballot. So there was a question regarding, is there any ability to try and align school trustee boundaries with council boundaries? And I don't really know because I'm not familiar with that, with the rules for that. So through the chair, I don't know if that's something that can be commented on or thought about, but I just want to share that as a comment as well.
Well, I'm actually going to go to our consultants there and see if Mr. Williams or Mr. Spicer are able to offer any comment on ward boundaries and alignment with school board trustee. I know you do this work in multiple municipalities, and I know you do it for school boards as well. So I wonder if you might offer a comment to the councillor on either the viability or the challenges to the viability of trying to align ward lines with school trustee lines.
I'll pick that up if I may, Mr. Chair. Other members of our team do spend a lot of their time working with school boards on such things as school boundaries, catchment areas, whatever the right term is. The actual alignment of trustees is not something that is part of this review. I'm sure we're aware of school boundaries and issues of that sort in drawing the lines. That would have been part of what went into these. Whether any of these cases apply right now, I can't say. And if there are glaring examples of that, we would certainly want to hear that and to determine whether that can be done. I also would suggest that the allocation of trustee seats, what's called the determination and distribution, I believe, it actually takes place before every election. So it's possible that some of those issues may even change after our review is completed. So it may be that the school board boundaries might be realigned to conform to ward boundaries rather than the other way around. But I can't claim to be the great expert on that, but it's certainly a point that I know the team will take into account.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And our clerk actually is able to provide a brief follow-up to that as well. So we'll go to Ms. Corman.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, that is correct. The school boards separately, London District Catholic School Board, the Thames Valley District School Board, will take these new boundaries and evaluate them in accordance with legislation for the determination of their new new representation on the school boards. For the two French school boards, it actually encompasses the whole city, so it won't be affected.
Thank you for that, Ms. Corman. And there was a second question in there, I think, for our consultants from Councillor Frank with regard to any, and I think you may have this in your phase 2 evaluation anyway, but with respect to names as well as numbers for wards, is that something that you've heard from the public on or that you would be considering in the next phase?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't heard that from the public, aside from the earlier speaker today. I think it's something that we can keep in mind as we move forward. But council could provide names to the wards if they would like at the end of the process as well.
Thank you, and
if
our
I may
clerk.
add to that, Mr. Chair, I suggest that is an exercise that would come when new wards are established. And in a sense, I'll leave that fight to you folks to sort out rather than for us to come in and pick those names for you. I think that is probably a community-based exercise that would better capture what the wards reflect.
Thank you. And our clerk has some comment to share on that one as well. Ms. Corman, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, as part of the terms of reference, naming conventions were asked to be considered, and as part of the round 2 of consultation, we do have a question in the survey that speaks to numbers and the naming conventions and any suggestions that might be had. So we will be collecting that information during this phase, but in the official bylaw that you will pass, numbers will remain, and then the naming will come later.
So I'm going to go back to Councillor Frank first to see if she's got any follow-up to those comments, and then I've got Councillor Ferreira and then Councillor Hopkins.
No, thank you.
Then Councillor Ferreira, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for recognizing me. Similar comments of Councillor Frank, so I won't go into them, but for me, it's a big, weight on how I would start seeing things would be for the community of interest and just that proper representation piece. But I did want to ask, separate from that, I'm not going to make the comments now really for how I see the options, but I wanted to ask, I do know that we're kind of on a time crunch here as well, and we need to have something resolved at this council before the end of this year, I believe, and we have to have something in place, I guess by January 1st of 2025. So I just wanted to ask, no? Okay, so I guess I'll start with clarifications of those questions. But what time frame do we have here? Because I know that as soon as we receive this report and the consultants go out and they start engaging with the community mid this month, so they're going to start very quickly. How much time do we have when that final report comes back in December? How much time do we have to just basically approve something? And then with potential appeals, where could that take us? So I'm just trying to ask.
We'll get our clerks to give you the timeline on that. Ms. Corman?
Thank you, through the chair. The timeline, we actually have to have the bylaw passed by the end of this year. So consultation will be open with the online survey going live tomorrow, plus the additional hybrid meetings that we're hosting. The survey and everything will be open until November 11th. We are then going to report back to the December SPPC meeting, and hopefully that report then will go to the last meeting of council in December. Then we will pass a bylaw, at which time there is an appeal period, and if an appeal is received, then we also have to provide for 6 months to allow for the process to go through the OLT. And once that is complete, the bylaw must be passed by January 1st, 2026. Or the appeal period and everything must be closed by January 1st, 2026.
Councillor Ferreira?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for clarifying that. So from my understanding, we have to have something here decided upon at council by the end of the year, and then we'll have, I guess, a full year, but not the full year for an appeal process. And after everything that we can't really foresee that may happen, we need to have that, I guess, the final decision by the end of the following year, 2026. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Ferreira. Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the consultants for the update here and the upcoming public participation meetings. I think it's always an interesting conversation in the community when we look at boundaries and everyone and changes to our boundaries, and everyone has a certain perspective, and it is a great opportunity to create community engagement. So I really appreciate the work that's being done in our city on our review of our ward boundaries. I do want to follow up with a question that was sort of given from the public around Lambeth. And Lambeth is in Ward 9, and Ward 9 is the ward that I represent, and the importance of what I've heard through the engagement to date of the rural divide. And Ward 9 is rural and urban, and it's coming together. And a number of these options really look at changing that greater rural community. And I want to speak in particular to Lambeth. And one of the options, you are dividing Lambeth, and wanted to know why that was part of an option when communities are important. But I just wanted to give ask you a little bit more as to your process of coming up with these options with a rural lens to the, I think there's 3 options that we're looking at, changing that rural divide. So if you could just give me a little bit more of your perspective there.
And just before I go to the consultants, I'm just going to ask all colleagues, because Councillor Hopkins, you mentioned there's a couple maps there. If there are particular preliminary option numbers that you can identify for the consultants, if you're raising a question around a specific map, I think that will help with the answers. So Councillor, can you reference the map numbers? 1, 2, and 3. So we'll go to our consultants now, Mr. Spicer and Mr. Williams, if you can provide some comment.
Sure, certainly happy to, Mr. Chair. I think that's a fantastic question, and the issue of rural London has emerged in some of our initial consultations. We have explored various options in which it would provide for putting most of rural London into a single ward. With that said, it is not always possible to afford for that. As Bob mentioned earlier, we're working with the guiding principles, which is sometimes in tension with each other. So as we are creating the maps, we're also thinking about population parity today and over time, along with communities of interest and natural boundaries. So it is a bit of a balancing act as we proceed. I'm not sure if my colleague would like to add to that at all.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I
May
appreciate.
just jump
Yeah.
in there
Oh,
quickly?
sure. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Williams.
Yeah, part of the point here is that these are options that try out different combinations, if you will. It was interesting to me that your citizen commentary early did not mention rural London, which on the map is a huge territory, not very many people. But part of our scenario was, can that be integrated into a map that otherwise deals with an urbanized community? And what we're looking at are possible ways to do that. Not definitive, but that's why we try it in different ways. Each change or each scenario involves ripple effects, if you will. So to create a large rural ward, as Zach just suggested, what might take up 1 of 14 wards, the other 13 are treated differently. If we try to take that area and place it in 2 or 3, then there's a little less room to maneuver elsewhere. So there's no one right answer, and that's part of what the community is going to be asked to respond to, what council will need to take into account when it finally comes to making a choice.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments there, and really looking forward to what the public thinks about these 4 options that you've given us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Looking for Councillor McAllister next.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just hoping to use this opportunity to speak a bit more about the east. Like, I know, obviously we had to do shuffling for the northwest, but recognizing that resulted in, I would say, dramatic changes to the eastern wards. And I'm hoping that some of my colleagues on the east side will want to speak to this as well. For me, I'm referencing specifically options 1 and 3. So what I find interesting, and maybe the consultants can speak to this, but it was kind of new to me in terms of the incorporation of Old East into my area. It's not something I had previously heard about. I'm not sure what kind of feedback we got from the public, or if this was purely just based on a population incorporation, but I'm just, if the consultants can speak to that a bit more, recognizing too that one of the Mr. Warren also spoke about the composition of Glencairn and Pond Mills, and that is actually still divided, and in no option does it really combine. And then also just recognizing that I have that stretch between Wellington and Adelaide, which is always a community of interest that's felt a bit out of place. Some of them often refer to themselves as Old South adjacent, and they think are always trying to figure out where they fit. And so in each option, I was surprised that that one remained, because I often hear that they feel more aligned to some of the more western wards. And not that, as was said, Adelaide is kind of often considered the boundary, but yeah, it is strange that that one's still there. And then there is a little triangle between Hamilton and Gore that has a neighborhood of interest that's always kind of been in Ward 1. It's where East Park is. There's a little subdivision over there. And a lot of them kind of associate themselves more with Hamilton Road and the Fairmont area. And that is also put into the rural areas in all the scenarios. So just a few comments there. I'm curious to hear from the consultants, but also my colleagues from 2, 3, and 4, because there were some dramatic changes in the east as well.
Thank you, Councillor McAllister. And I'm going to look for other speakers, but I do have myself on the list. So since I don't have anyone else yet, I'm going to ask Councillor Rahman to take the chair, and I'll offer some comments.
Thank you. I have the chair. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor, for taking the chair for me here, and to our consultants for the work that's been done so far. I will say that when I look at these preliminary options, I will be honest, I would prefer us to have the option to narrow the scope at this point, but I know that that's not a recommended process. I think that a couple of the options before us really create a bit of background noise that is going to be, that we may spend a lot of time suggesting that these are not great options, rather than focusing on how to make a couple of the viable options maybe a little bit better. But that's just sort of comment in general. I don't think that having options where there are clear no's to meeting one of the 5 criteria really helps us garner good public feedback. And I would argue actually that particularly on option 2, from an East End perspective, communities of interest is actually a fail. I look at that map for option 2, and to draw a line down Wavell Street, which is not a natural boundary, and divide the Argyle neighborhood in half, right along where their community center, which is really the heart of the community there. I think that's very divisive to a community of interest. And I would say similarly in map 4, the divide in the east really chops up communities of interest, particularly the Fairmont and the Argyle neighborhoods. Even in that map too, there's a suggestion that a portion of the Huron Heights area would become part of the Argyle area, and the same in option 4. And quite honestly, when you're up at Highbury and Huron, that neighborhood has no connection to the Argyle neighborhood. Really, it's 2 separate communities of interest, and it's really dividing one and putting another one that doesn't match up in together. I will say also, I want to echo what Councillor McAllister said. I think in the new proposed Ward 1s in option 1 and option 3, I think that stretch along Wellington Road probably is a better fit as part of Ward 14 with the general Wellington Road corridor, so that those folks are sort of together along what is going to be an area of heavy development with the rapid transit urban corridor there. And I would concur, actually having lived in that neighborhood in the Classic Drive East Park area, that certainly the Tweedsmuir Public School and the Fairmont neighborhood, they are much more closely aligned with the rest of Hamilton Road than they are with the Summerside neighborhood. So I think that's, certainly on the south side of Hamilton Road, I can see a little bit more connection across the river with the folks from Summerside, but on the north side, I think they very much align with the sort of Tweedsmuir Fairmont neighborhood. So I really am concerned, particularly in options 2 and 4, how we're carving up the East End and actually diluting the voices there. I do have a question through you, Madam Presiding Officer, as well, because I note in all of these, the total population includes an undercount of approximately 3% and includes 24,000 student population not captured in the census. This for me is a question of, so where are we allocating those students? Because they're not all Western students. They are spread across multiple wards. We hear consistently that more and more post-secondary students are not living on campus. They're living further and further away from campus. And so if we're allocating the bulk of them to campus, either Western or Fanshawe, I actually have concerns about that because I don't think it's reflective of the population where students are living today. So I'd like to know how the 24,000 student population is being allocated across multiple wards, because they are not a single ward population. And it seems to me, based on the numbers, the bulk of them are allocated to Ward 6.
Thank you. I'll go to our consultants on that, and you have just under a minute after.
Thank you very much for that question. I think we definitely take this feedback back with us. It is valuable to us, and we definitely appreciate it. We are joined here today as well by Josh Valenti from Watson's, who can respond to the question about student population.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, so we actually take that 24,000 and we have divided it both into on-campus, off-campus, for students both at Fanshawe and at Western across the city. And we do look at a process of, and our methodology utilizes census data, but also looks at census data where we have unoccupied dwelling units during that census period and have affiliated a number of those residents with student population, and then multiplied that by a student yield of what we expect in each of those student residents across the city. And yes, a majority of those are found around the Western and Fanshawe campuses, but there is a number of students that are attending both Western and Fanshawe that are residents of the City of London and are also captured within the census. So we are just looking at 24,000 outside of that number.
Thank you. Go back to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. So I appreciate that. I feel like we're perhaps over allocating the student population to the Western campus and not enough diluted across the rest of the city. But I'm not an expert in statistics, so I appreciate the response there. I also wonder if there can be some comment on how we came up with what to me is an entirely new ward in Ward 4, and kind of broke the existing Ward 4 up and spread it out. Part of it goes to Ward 3, part of it goes to Ward 1, part of it goes to Ward 2. So how did we reach the creation of what seems to be an entirely new ward in the North End?
Thank you. I'll go back to our consultants. Not sure who wants to take that.
Could I clarify which option you're talking about, please?
Oh, yes, in 1 and 3, there's a brand new Ward 4, and what used to be Ward 4 has been divided up.
My assumption at the moment is that this is part of the arithmetic of distributing that heavy population and the growth that's expected along that northern fringe of the city, if you will, that trying to do the calculations and create equitable distribution of those residents across the various wards ended up requiring the creation of an additional ward in that area to deal with that population. And using the boundaries that were there, or the major arterials that were there, that's how that scenario came about. Zach, I don't know if you could add to that, or Josh.
No, that's pretty much what I was going to say as well. It's really an effort to try to balance some of the population growth up in that area.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I know I got about 12 seconds left, so really briefly, on that piece, it doesn't feel like the growth that I'm seeing at Planning Committee kind of matches up with that area of the city. So I'm just wondering through you, Madam Presiding Officer, if we know what the most recent sort of planning data from Mr. Mather's team has been provided to the consultants in terms of informing where the growth is happening. I certainly know the 8,400 units we just approved in what MAP 2 or 1 and 3 would propose as being part of Ward 2 will help with the population balance there, but I'm wondering about that new Ward 4 piece. And I don't know if the consultants or Mr. Mathers or both can provide a comment on that.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Mather and then to the consultants if they have anything to add. Go ahead.
Through the chair. So my understanding, and the consultant can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the projection that's being used to be able to provide the data, the growth data within this model is the 2022 Watson projection that was approved by council, I believe, at the at the start of 2023. So that doesn't reflect any of the most recent planning changes and or any of the changes that have come out as far as the recent rezonings or in the last year.
Thank you. Final comment?
Yes, just a very quick final question, and I'm going to ask for maybe a 30-second lenience here. Some of us have shared these on social media already. Many of us are getting comments back by email on social media from our folks. And so while I appreciate the public engagement that the consultants are doing, a lot of the feedback is going to come through us. So I wonder if the clerks can indicate how we can provide emails, comments we're getting to them to synthesize into this process.
Thank you. That's your time, and I'll go to the clerk.
Thank you, through the chair. Any of the comments that you receive via social media or email could be sent to any of the project leads, Lyra Donna Rafuna or Jeannie Raycroft, and we will synthesize everything and provide that to the consultants.
Thank you. I will look to return the chair to you, Deputy Mayor, and I've got Mayor Morgan, Councillor Hilliard, Councillor Hopkins, and Councillor Stevenson on the list, and then myself.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and I'm just going to get you to repeat that list for me so I can't capture everyone.
Thank you, Mayor Morgan, Councillor Hilliard, Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Stevenson, then myself.
Okay, and we will go to Mayor Morgan next.
Thanks. I'll just provide some initial comments at the start of the process. First, I find it very interesting because I know previously when I was the Ward 7 councillor, I had lots of opinions on this. In fact, I pushed for a comprehensive ward boundary review that the rest of council resisted last term, but we made some small adjustments to some of the wards. And my main push on that was a desire for a level of effective representation. You know, at the time, representing a ward in the city that was almost double the smallest ward in the city seemed like a very significant challenge for, 40 some odd thousand people having to push their opinions through one elected representative, whereas in another part of the city, 20 some odd thousand individuals get to push their view through one elected representative. And I would say with that previous hat on, although I know that the new ward councillor or the current ward councillor can provide her own comments, I would have thought the naming of the ward would have been exceptionally difficult in Ward 7 because it'd probably have like an 8-part name to it, given there's about 8 or 9, maybe 10 communities of interest, depending on how you want to divide it within that part of the city. Which makes me think about like the fact that having a citywide perspective now, there's a whole lot of ways that we can do this, and there's a whole lot of ways that we can really grind it down to a street-by-street level. But for the most part, there isn't really a good way to balance all of these different pieces. So you've got to kind of work our way through a public process to land on a relatively acceptable structure that can be tweaked over time. The big concern that I would have at the start of the process is ensuring that we plan for the future and that there are modifications that can be made to the wards to accommodate possible rapid population growth, particularly under the context of the recent upzoning we did in certain parts of the city, which would concentrate population density in certain areas. And you certainly wouldn't want to be in a position 10 years from now to be where the current map kind of heads to, where you've got these grossly unbalanced wards. That being said, communities of interest are important, and I know that there's always balance to that too. I actually was thinking when we talked about Lambeth, maybe if I lived in Lambeth, I'd want 2 ward councillors, because if I didn't like what one said, I might go to the other one, or maybe I'd have them both advocating for me. But then there's other parts of your ward that maybe draw you to that. At the end of the day, the responsibility of a ward councillor is to try to provide representation to everybody, whether they vote or not. But if they live in that area, try to do the best you possibly can. And over the years, I would have partnered with different ward councillors on different ward meetings because, on this issue, maybe Ward 7 and Ward 8 really were similar. We'd do a joint meeting. On another one around universities, it would be a Ward 7, Ward 6, Ward 5 maybe combination. And, some issues with trail systems and development in the very north of the city would be a Ward 7 and 5 issue together. So, no matter what you land on, it'll be a good process. There will be wards in the future and there'll be tweaks that you can make to it. But, if we try to struggle to balance all of these things perfectly, I think it would be an endless process. So I would encourage people to do the best you can, consult and listen carefully, try to land it with relative balance, but recognize that if something isn't quite working, as long as the words are structured relatively coherently and can be adjusted, that there's adjustments that can be made by subsequent councils. And the last piece that I think we should all enter this context with, including myself, is these aren't our wards. It's not my city, it's not your wards. It's the wards that the next elected representatives will represent. And people will choose under whatever ward boundaries we decide who those people will be, and they'll represent those wards well, I'm sure, because they'll have gone through an electoral process under the confines of those new wards. So, hopefully it'll be lots of the same people. I like all of you. I'd like to come back one day. But at the end of the day, we're making a decision for a future iteration of council and for Londoners to be represented by whatever that composition of council is. And so, our job to get it right and thoughtful is pretty important, but also, we're not going to be able to balance all of these things perfectly. So I think we're at a great spot in the process. It's going to be very interesting to be a part of and of course, listen to the public on. And, I appreciate the work that our consultants are doing. And again, my only concern at this point is how the current decisions we've already made from a planning perspective and a zoning perspective layer into the population projections that are being used in these particular maps.
Thank you, Mayor Morgan. Next on my speakers list, I have Councillor Hillier.
Thank you for recognizing me. Just listening to my colleagues speak and acknowledging what a problem it is when we start moving these lines around and trying to explain to people where they live in the city, in their wards. And I'm looking at the redraw on Ward 14 on preliminary auctions 1 and 3. And I do appreciate the inclusion of the rural areas because it makes it a lot easier for one councillor to handle the rural problems. But I'm looking at the northern boundary and it's on Hamilton Road and it's cutting a lot of neighborhoods in half. And I'm wondering if the consultant Watsons could consider using the river for the northern boundary of Ward 14. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hillier. Mr. Williams, did you want to comment on that? I saw your hand go up there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we'd be happy to consider any of those ideas. That's the point of this next round of discussion, hearing from members of council and the community to help us determine whether something like moving the line you just talked about can be helpful to preserving community of interest and how it ripples through everything else. And that's one of the dilemmas we have here. This is a very complicated geographic area, if I can put it that way. Finding the right lines to use, moving them to adjust to population means other things have to move. So I appreciate that those suggestions are there, and comment earlier about how we hear about that is going to be an important part of the next phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Councillor Hillier, did you want to continue or did you have anything else?
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's perfect.
And I have Councillor Hopkins again next.
Mr. Chair, I am on round 2 with my questions, so happy to give the floor to other councillors that have not spoken before I ask a question.
I appreciate that very much, Councillor Hopkins. So I will go to Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Rahman, but I will keep you on the list once we've gone through everybody the first time. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. Yes, when I looked here, the Ward 4, as I know it and love it, is pretty much obliterated in both option 1 and 2. And I did sort of intuitively know my ward might be more affected than others, given that we've got to move somewhere, right? I am a little concerned about that Carling Heights is chopped in half along Oxford. That is just something to know. So a lot of those streets continue north and south of Oxford, and it is a neighborhood community of Carling Heights there. Other than that, as the deputy mayor said, a brand new Ward 4. So it's going to be an interesting sell and hearing what the public has to say, but I'm open to hearing that.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Just for colleagues' information, I have Councillor Rahman, Councillor Pribble, and Councillor Trussow who haven't spoken next, and then I have Councillor Hopkins for a second round. So Councillor Rahman, you are next.
Thank you, and through you. So I'll first start with some of my questions, and the deputy mayor hinted on some of these around the treatment of students. And I know that the consultants shared that they did the count based on residence spaces, as well as looking at where natural settlement patterns happen. I did the same, and I came to very different conclusions around numbers. So I'm wondering if we can dive deeper into that student count number, because I think it would be helpful for us to understand that treatment, even looking at polling exit data from 2022 at Western and looking at the breakdown of how many students resided in Ward 6 or voted for candidates in Ward 6 versus others also shows some differences in terms of settlement. And I think that that would be helpful to look at, as well as at Fanshawe and the changing demographics at Fanshawe across 2 campuses within the city. So I'm not sure if they can comment any further on that, but I would find that helpful.
Well, we can go back to them and see if they can provide a little bit more detailed information on that. And in particular, I think Councillor Rahman, you highlighted the fact that Fanshawe is now spread across multiple campuses, so how that's been accounted for?
Thanks, and through the chair, just to kind of follow up on that one, we did have conversations with both Western and Fanshawe admissions. We did have some conversations on those new campuses, especially the ones in the south on the Fanshawe. The numbers there, from a population point of view, are quite low. Enrollment's about, I think they were referred to it as about 2,000 on that campus. And much of those students are and may be located within that general vicinity, but are captured within the census data as well for that particular campus. So that's maybe where our numbers are in addition, is those students that we are capturing at Fanshawe and at Western that live across the city. There are a number of them that are captured within the census, and within those base numbers, we are layering on an additional 24,000 of non-census captured numbers as well. And those are typically the students that are there on a shorter term basis, or fewer months throughout the year, that would not be residing there during those summer census enumeration years. But happy to further these conversations if there are some numbers that the members here feel that may represent. We can compare those to ours and have those conversations furthermore as well.
Councillor Rahman?
Yes, thank you. Where I really struggle is that the June report that we received here to begin this process showed Ward 6 at about 23,000, showing at the lowest in terms of ward size. And then in this report now shows it at 43,000 in 2021. So that is quite a tremendous jump. And in that jump, it also then centralizes some of the changes. So that took place in what is Ward 7. So where Ward 7, part of Ward 7's population could have been absorbed partially by Ward 6, it is now restructured to be a Ward 7, Ward 5 composition. I would have liked to have seen an option that contained some of the sharing of redivision of Ward 7 into more of Ward 8 and Ward 6, because I do think there was some natural alignment in terms of residents and communities of interest between 6 and 7 more than 5 and 7. So I'm just wondering, from the feedback you received, being right now that Ward 7 has 49,000 residents, which is double our smallest ward almost at this point. I'm wondering how proportionally we went out for that information from a ward that has less representation right now at this table.
Thank you, Councillor Rahman, and we'll go back to our consultants for that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm a little unclear about the question, but I think you were sort of asking about the sort of feedback that we've received to date about that. We have heard from some of the public about the population figures, but with that said, one of our goals with this next round is to get feedback about proposed changes. So we hope that we expect to hear about that ward and others, but we'll have to see what we hear next week.
Well, and I think Councillor Rahman, and I'll seek some clarification for her on that, but how the number changed so radically from the June report to this report for one ward and that allocation of students, because we've been told it's actually being factored across the city, but the June report and this report don't align. Councillor Rahman, I won't count this as your time, but do you want to clarify if that was what you were
Sure,
looking for?
yeah. So if you look at the June report, you look at the current report, population in Ward 6 changes dramatically as it relates to what I assume is mostly student count, and around Fanshawe, it's only 5,000, less than 5,000 student change.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my apologies to the councillor for misunderstanding the question. I'll defer to my colleague Josh Valenti from Watson's to respond.
Yep, and thanks, Zach, and through you, Mr. Chair, we do have about incorporated about 8,500 students or populations on the Western campus. So a big chunk of that is actually found within the Western campus for students. And then there is an additional 14,000 of off-campus Western students. And based on our analysis, majority are those, as noted, falling within Ward 6. But not all of them per se have been there. But those are some of the scalable numbers that we are working with of that 24,000. About, I think it was 22,000 and change of those are found within the Western realm of that off-campus and on-campus number. So quite a significant jump in population there.
Councillor Rahman?
Thank you. So again, I know I'm limited on time. I will say I did review Ottawa's ward boundary change and Guelph's ward boundary change as well to see and look at exactly how, excuse me, they treated their student populations as well. And I see this as a unique treatment. And I do see that, in my opinion, looking at it, it significantly impacts the way that Ward 7 is split in this new proposal. So I have grave concerns about community of interest staying together. I have concerns that the part of the city that is also going to face a federal change in boundary is now also facing a significant change in boundary in this part of the city, which does not in tune align with the change federally either. So now, again, from a voting perspective, in 2025, when if they have the federal election as so intended, then there is the possibility that, again, they're voting in an all-new ward, and then again, they'll be voting in a ward that is very off the mark from that federal ward, and a different provincial ward because the provincial ward stays the same. So we talked about school boards keeping in line with the changes at the municipal level, but yet in terms of representation, we've also not looked to align with our federal and our provincial partners where there's possibility, especially when it comes to community of interest. So I do find that interesting as well. I have shared my concerns that Ward 7 in the proposed map 1 and 3 puts a lot of new residents all in one area with very little connection to older established neighborhoods, which from an advocacy perspective makes advocacy challenging, especially when they have things like new community centers, new libraries, and other new resources that are needed direly. And before, we're able to pool their advocacy together with some of the older established neighborhoods, which were also seeking these types of benefits, but now would be separated. So those are my concerns. I hope to hear from residents and look forward to the feedback. One more thing on development, I will say. Looking at the approvals that we made, I made a map marking off all of the approvals that have happened since 2022 to now in Ward 5 and Ward 7, which are significant. We've got a number of new subdivisions coming in. We have a number of approvals that have happened, and I do not see that same in the new allocated Ward 4, but the population shows that it would see sustained growth. So I'm not sure where those projections are coming from, and I know that they don't align with our 2022 to 2024 projections. So I hope that there's a way that we can actually work in some of the development applications and changes that we've made through planning into the restructuring of this as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Rahman. And moving on, Councillor Pribble, you are next.
Thank you. I might as well just follow up on what my fellow Councillor Rahman just said. I have majority of the proposed 4 now, and I would tend to agree that, again, those numbers seem to me quite high, in terms of what we have, and currently 5 and 7 north of Sunningdale, upcoming huge, quite large developments. But I just want to go kind of to the beginning. So we started to look at this because what we said is that it's kind of the effective representation and have each ward to have a very similar number of residents. It certainly is not the one that we are going to look at only. And again, if you look at what the residents already said, that communities of interest is actually their #1 priority. But I just want to let you know, if we, and please, the consultants, if you want to make any comments. And I do realize that our population is growing, so the differences potentially will be larger. But option 1, so currently we have 18,000, the biggest difference, which we kind of decided we need to address it. Option 1, if we go with your projections, 25, 30, 35. Option 1, 18,000 difference, 16,000 difference, 21,000 difference. Option 2, 10, 12, 15. Option 3 is the closest one, 7, 7, 10. Option 4, 9, 5, 10, which would be close in terms of the representation. But again, even the consultants are saying communities of interest is a big no. So I'm just trying to figure out here what brought us to this, to realign, and then the proposal coming out from the consultants is not much far off what we wanted to address. So if I can have any comments from the consultants, please.
And Mr. Spicer, Mr. Williams, did you have any comment to that?
I'll start off on that if I may, Mr. Chair. We did not come in with the idea that your current system is completely broken. There are a number of features of it that still apply, that are still valid. So we're not talking about a complete rebuild. We're not talking about, erasing everything and start over again. There are some things that we would want to keep. And I think the first option is, I think, referred to as a kind of minimal change. We've heard this before. People get confused about what wards they live in. Well, this would be a way to minimize those while still addressing some of those shortcomings that we identified. Not going to be perfect. We've heard that several times. Trying to balance off the principles as best we can. And each of those scenarios will have a slightly different mix of those things, community of interest versus natural boundaries versus growth and so forth. So in the end, there's no one obvious solution as far as I can see, given that we're hearing from some of you that it's the population parity and others that it's community. And that's the prerogative of council to decide which of those directions it would like to go. Our hope is that not when we come to a final recommendation, that both will be viable, both will be an improvement, but they'll be different. And council will have to decide, listening to fellow colleagues, listening to the community, which of those take precedence, and we will do our best to address some of these kinds of concerns after we hear this consultation from the community. Zach, do you want to add?
Councillor Pribble? Or sorry, Mr. Spicer, did you want to add to that before we go back to the councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing more to add.
Councillor Pribble?
Thank you. I just want to reiterate kind of the numbers and think about all of us councillors, the reason why we started to address this issue and to look what's in front of us. But the most important thing is whatever we are going to propose to go forward is going to be the feedback of the 500,000 of Londoners. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pribble. I also have a bit of a growing list here. I have Councillor Trussow next, and then Councillor Pelosa, and I still have Councillor Hopkins for a second round. So Councillor Trussow, I have you next, sir.
Thank you very much. And given the fact that any elector in the city, once we pass our bylaw, can challenge that at the board, I'd like to ask the consultants, do you feel as if any of the 4 options present more of a risk of being challenged and potentially overturned?
Well, let's ask Mr. Spicer or Mr. Williams about that.
Councillor, I would not suggest that any of them are more likely to reach that category. Our goal, maybe it's optimistic, maybe it's pie in the sky, is that whatever we propose would be defensible. Again, determining which of those principles, for example, takes precedent. We would not knowingly bring to council a plan that we believed would be invalid in front of the Ontario Land Tribunal. That's part of what this next round is about. And we've made this point before that these 4 options are there for discussion to help us work out some of these priorities and to address some of these shortcomings that members of council have identified today in the community. So I can't say unilaterally that one of them is going to create a bigger risk. As you just said, it only takes one person. So we're not going to be able to anticipate who might take umbrage at some particular part of this plan. And our goal is to make sure that if indeed that happens, what you have in your bylaw is a defensible scenario in the light of the principles that we're working with.
And we'll go back to Councillor Trussow. And Councillor Trussow, can I ask that you just turn your camera on while you're speaking, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. Let me
Thank you. Go ahead. Oh, now we have you on mute, Councillor. So we can see you, but now we can't hear you. Still no sound, Councillor. Oh, there we go.
I don't want to be dismissive of the really good work that you've predominantly done here, but I have to say, I cannot understand how my neighborhood in Broughdale goes through Adelaide, goes through Highbury, and goes all the way over to Clark Road. And could you just try to explain to me what the rationale is for that kind of, I'm going to call it a spaghetti ward, to be, and I say that with all respect, that's the term of art. How is that defensible?
Sorry, Councillor, can you just refer to the map number you're talking about? I think I know, but I don't want to presume that it's map 2.
It's 4.
Or 4, sorry. And you're talking about what would be numbered Ward 8 in that map, correct?
That's correct.
So we'll go to our consultants for that with respect to the ward in option 4 that's labeled as Ward 8.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you. Appreciate the comments. And this is precisely what this report is intended to generate, discussion. What we're trying to do with option 4 is to provide for better population parity moving out towards 2030 and 2034. What we note in the report and in our presentation today is that that creates less success with some of the other principles, including in this case communities of interest. But we appreciate that feedback. That's what this phase is intended to do. We'll certainly take that back. So thank you very much, Councillor.
Councillor Trussow?
Yes, thank you. And I think for today, I'm going to leave it at that, because if I understand it, we're not going to be eliminating any of the options at this meeting, and that will come later. But I don't think that option 4 is sustainable, and I will be advocating that it be removed at some point or substantially changed. Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor. And Councillor Pelosa, I have you next. Just before I go to Councillor Pelosa, I have been asked, I did plan for a break at 4:30 for colleagues. There will be some food in the Councillors Lounge and an opportunity for a bio break at 4:30. So I just want to let folks know that is the plan on or around, because if we're in the middle of an item, we'll finish the item before we take our break. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, as that was the question I texted you privately, so great that we all know the answer now. And we will diligently wrap things up to an acceptable point for 4:30. A couple comments and then a question. Just in regards to option 4, I know some community of interests are divided. just this option really does split down Upper Queen Street and through White Oaks down a street, neighborhood streets, cutting everyone in half. That'd be my concern. I know as we discussed this last term of council and this term, in regards to those of us who do have a rural area that we represent, having those concerns of, are you better that someone, will say, specializes in rural area concerns and brings those forward? Or are we better that several of us shoulder residents in rural areas so we have different voices raising concerns and potentially advocating together with different perspectives for those residents? I would say that I would also apply to some of these map options for the downtown area. Are we better that one person specializes and raise that voice, or multiple people come to the table with different perspectives representing different sections of the core? So I'm along for the ride. We'll see where this goes with public feedback. Encourage residents to get out, as I know the public engagement session I attended in the past, I had a great conversation, which I appreciated with the presenters, but little public involvement in person. So hoping this next round, as we get closer to a decision point, garners more public interest. My question follows up on a point that I was also wondering, along with Councillor Rahman, in regards to, it's on page 244 for anyone interested, and it was just saying that these forecasts show the pattern of population imbalance present in 2025 and that they're maintained or worsened by 2035. As we look at the population growth projection numbers, realizing the plan before us should serve us for ideally multiple election cycles, does our partners simply grow the numbers that we have based on their alignments, as to I have extra road filling in, as they were ball diamonds and it's just concession after concession now filling in with homes? Does this plan take in consideration any of the planning applications that we have approved at council over the timeline, realizing we don't necessarily know when shovels are going to be in the ground? We can't force that, though we request it. Do you have access to the information, or have any of it been taken into consideration through these numbers and forecasting?
Mr. Williams or Mr. Spicer, did you want to speak to the, or Mr. Valente, if you want to speak to the planning approvals that are coming fast and furious and their inclusion or not in the plan here?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can start off by saying we have the municipal-wide forecast numbers as provided through that 2022 report. Those numbers do look at where, or the volume and number of units that are to be prepared or to be developed over X amount of years. Some assumptions, yes, are in place. We do look out in 5-year increments, but we do take into account what level and what stages of these development applications are in and make some assumptions on where they may fall within those 5-year buckets. Beyond that, we also do have the lower level, sub-geographic level data prepared through the work that the city does. And that has been utilized here in this regards and does have some account for those applications through the planning process, from an understanding of when they believe they are going to be developed. Give or take, it's not an exact science on when those plans may come to fruition, but our best estimate and best guesses are included in these projections on location and timing. And Bob, I see you have something to add there as well.
And if I may, in response to an earlier question about deadlines and times for approval, clearly we have to have a.
Sorry, can we just finish with the topic at hand
Sorry.
before we go back into a past question that was asked by somebody else?
Well, I think that it may be germane to what you're saying, so I just want to let.
Okay, if it's germane, yes,
Yeah.
I just don't want to, I got a question follow-up for staff after this.
Mr. Williams?
Yeah, I was simply going to say that clearly we have to have a cutoff date to say these are the numbers we have based on what Mr. Valente just talked about as of, I don't know, November 30th or what, 2024. We'll have to work with what we know or believe is in place at that date and move forward. That should be obvious, but if things start to come on in 2025, I don't believe that we would necessarily want to go back and redo all of this in the light of those decisions. We have to work with a deadline.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes, I would assume that was a given since this decision point would be made prior to those numbers. My question through you is, having heard the concern from multiple counselors and our partners' comments, through you to staff, any staff, is there any more relevant information or details that council might have excluded in direction that could be provided, or numbers that could be released that we haven't directed to be released? Just making sure that everyone at the table is dealing with the best information possible, that council could have made a different decision to help inform decision-making.
So I'm not sure who might want to field that, if there's anything at all, but I'll go to Ms. Datersbeer to start.
I'm happy to be the any other staff. Thank you, through the chair. I think what you're suggesting, if I get this correct through the chair again, is that you're looking to see if there's any other additional population information or anything else that we would have that could influence this. I think off the top, I would say anything that we have, any additional information, we'll be sure the consultants get. But right now, I don't have anything to share, but we'll make sure that they have the most up-to-date information.
I don't want to interject on your behalf, Councillor Pelosa, but I think in addition to because we've heard a lot about planning applications that we've been approved, and of course, to everyone, and especially Mr. Mather's team, tremendous numbers this year. But I think what Councillor Pelosa might be asking about is things like the vacant land needs assessment, what lands might be serviced or potentially serviced with any adjustments to the urban growth boundary, any sorts of things like that, or perhaps even how the MMP might influence growth patterns. But I know that might be a lot of crystal balling. But Councillor Pelosa, was that sort of the any other data you were thinking of?
Yeah, it kind of encapsulated both. Just sometimes there's things in works behind the scenes about servicing. Just if this plan is the plan that's going to, for consulting, that's going to service for multiple years in elections, just if we know that stuff is coming in the pipeline, that even the consultants be given a heads up about it, just if the information's available. And I know sometimes that council's the barrier, that we didn't say release it or engage, so we don't.
Well, let's see if Mr. Mathers can expand on his earlier answer for us.
Through the chair. So if a couple pieces I think that are kind of germane to this discussion, as I mentioned previously, the Watson projections were used as the basis of this forecast, which for the purposes, we'd be using this for some of the other work we're doing. But I will flag that we have been asked by council to use the Ministry of Finance projections as far as our newest land needs assessment. There's also last week a new version of those forecasts came available. They will be coming likely every year, so it will be a hard thing to try to keep up with if you're doing a project like this. But I will highlight that if you're looking for trying to incorporate our land needs studies results in this work, that will take several more months. So we're looking at coming back in December with some proposed total land needs values, but you're not going to have a map to be able to use and allocate those lands to until well into 2025, into the first quarter of 2025. So you won't be able to meet this deadline if you're looking at using some of the newest data.
Councillor Pelosa, you're good? Okay. So I am coming back now to Councillor Hopkins for your second go.
Thank you. My question was very similar to Councillor Pelosa, and thanks for everyone for giving more information back to us. Maybe just to add to that conversation, as we're looking at projections, making assumptions, anticipated growth for 2035, would there be opportunities, if we've got it wrong, to make adjustments before then to the ward boundaries?
So I'm going to go to the clerks for that because, as the mayor alluded to, there was actually minor adjustments made in the last term of council. So perhaps we can get the clerks to respond.
Through the chair, yes, that is a possibility. We also do have a council-approved policy that we regularly review our ward boundary reviews to make our ward boundaries to make sure that they are still applicable and relevant to the city. So we will be undertaking that work on a regular basis.
Councillor?
No.
Okay, I have no other speakers on the list. And seeing none with that pregnant pause to see if anybody else wanted to get back on, I am going to ask the clerk to open the vote on this.
Counselor Trossel? Closing the vote, motion carries 15 to 0.